In a packed military courtroom, Judge Victor Raines sneered at Commander Arya Kane, the only black woman in the room, calling her weak in front of everyone. He thought she'd bow her head and take the humiliation. But Arya carried a call sign so dangerous it could end his career in seconds. Why was he so desperate to silence her? And what happens when she finally speaks? "If this fired you up, stick with me." The truth she drops will shake the whole courtroom. I can still feel the chill from that morning, not from the air conditioning, but from the way the whole room looked at Commander Arya Kane. Naval Station Norfolk's military courtroom was all steel and formality-polished wood flags standing sharp in the corners, and a silence heavy enough to crush anyone not built for it. Arya sat at the defense table, the only black woman in sight. Her dress blues were immaculate, every ribbon, every crease exact. But no matter how perfect she looked, you could tell half the room had already made up their minds about her. Judge Victor Raines leaned forward from the bench, his lips curling into something between a smirk and a snarl. "You're not special, Commander. You're just weak." The words landed like a slap, deliberate, public, and meant to cut. He didn't just mean weak as an officer. He meant weak because she was a woman. Weak because she was black. And he wanted everyone to hear it. From the gallery, a cluster of white officers exchanged knowing glances. One whispered, "Here we go, playing the race card." Another chuckled under his breath as if her career was already finished. Arya didn't answer, didn't blink. Her left hand rested on the table, fingertips grazing the thin scar across her palm, the only sign she'd heard every word. Her gaze stayed locked on Raines, cool and steady, as if daring him to say more. Colonel Marcus Harlow, the prosecutor, took a measured step into the well of the court. His boots struck the tile with a slow, deliberate rhythm. "Commander Kane," he began, voice sharp enough to cut glass during Operation Blackfish. "You refused a direct order from your superior officer. That decision didn't just show poor judgment. It put lives at risk. Deadly risk." He let the words hang, scanning the room like he wanted the weight of them to crush her right there. "Men under your command trusted you to follow the chain of command, and you decided," he tilted his head, "that your personal opinion mattered more than the United States Navy." Arya's voice was calm when it came. "I made a judgment call based on the facts in front of me." Harlow's eyes narrowed. "Facts or ego?" He turned to the judge. "Permission to remind the court that Commander Kane has a history of unconventional choices in the field." Raines didn't look at her when he granted it. "Proceed." The tension in the room thickened. A low murmur rippled through the back rows. Quick, sharp whispers cut off as soon as they started. Near the rear of the gallery, Eva Moreno, a young civilian aide, sat with a closed notebook on her lap. She wasn't there to take minutes. She was there to watch. And she was watching everything: Raines's tight grip on his gavel, the way Harlow circled Arya like a wolf, and the flicker of muscle in Arya's jaw when the judge's words landed. Then Eva's eyes stopped. By the side exit, half in shadow, a man in a dark suit stood with his arms loosely crossed. His lapel carried a small row of service pins, subtle but impossible to miss if you knew what you were looking at. He wasn't part of the legal team. He wasn't Navy police. And yet, no one asked him to leave. Eva studied him for a beat longer than was polite. The man didn't flinch, didn't look away. Arya hadn't glanced his way, not yet. But for a brief second, as she adjusted the edge of her jacket, her hand shifted just enough for her fingers to brush that scar again. Harlow noticed too. Still nothing to say. "Commander," he pressed. She met his eyes, her voice steady. "Nothing worth wasting this court's time." It wasn't loud, but in the silence that followed, it might as well have been a shout. From the bench, Raines's smirk returned. "We'll see how long that composure lasts." And just like that, I knew they weren't just here to put her on trial for a decision. They were here to strip her down in front of everyone to make her an example. The only question was, who in that room was going to regret it first? The lights dimmed, and the big screen at the side of the courtroom flickered to life. The grainy, ghostly glow of thermal imaging filled the room, jagged rooftops, dark streets, and pale human shapes moving in the frame. Over it all came the sharp, urgent crackle of a radio feed. Target locked. Execute. For a beat, the only sound was static. Then Arya's voice, clear, firm, with no hesitation, cut through the air. Negative command. Civilians in the target zone. That was it. No screaming, no uncertainty, just a flat refusal. Harlow turned from the screen, his face lit by its cold glow. So you thought you knew better than your entire chain of command. His tone wrapped around that one word, you like it was poison. From somewhere in the gallery a voice muttered, "This is why women shouldn't be in combat." It wasn't loud, but in the silence of the room, it carried like a gunshot. Arya didn't even turn her head. "The operational landscape changed," she said evenly. "That's called tactical judgment." Harlow smiled, but it wasn't pleasant. It was the smile of a man who thought he'd found the crack in the wall. Tactical judgment, or chronic insubordination. He paced a step closer to her table. "This isn't the first time you disobeyed a direct order. Is it, Commander?" That hung in the air longer than it should have. For just a fraction of a second, Arya's eyes narrowed, a flicker quick but telling. Harlow tilted his head. "Silverfish. Ring any bells?" It was subtle, but I saw her left hand curl against the table. She didn't answer. And in that moment, I knew whatever Silverfish was, it wasn't just another mission. The judge shifted in his seat, clearly curious now, but Harlow backed off, almost as if he'd dropped the word on purpose and was content to let it fester in the jury's minds. From the back, Eva Moreno quietly slipped out of her seat. She moved without drawing attention, but I noticed. She stepped into the hallway, pulled a slim phone from her pocket, and dialed. The call was short. Her voice was steady, almost casual. "She's holding," Eva said, then ended the call without another word. She didn't say who she was calling, but from the way her eyes had locked on that suited man in the shadows earlier, I had my guess. Whoever he was, he hadn't stopped watching. Back inside the screen still froze on Arya's thermal image, a single figure standing between the target building and a cluster of smaller white shapes. Civilians. The silence in the room had weight now. Harlow let it linger, then turned to the judge. "The facts are clear. The order was lawful. Commander Kane's refusal compromised the mission. Arya's gaze didn't waver. And saved lives. Raines's gavel tapped once, sharp and deliberate. This court will decide whether that was your call to make, Commander. But from where I was sitting, it felt like the decision had already been made, just not by the people you'd expect." The recess bell had barely finished ringing when Arya rose from her seat. She moved with the same controlled pace she'd shown all morning. Not hurried, not slow, but there was a weight in her steps now, as if each one carried something she wasn't ready to share. The courtroom had thinned out. A few officers milled near the back, their low voices blending into a muted hum. Somewhere boots tapped against the tiled floor. Papers shuffled. The air smelled faintly of coffee gone cold. At the clerk's desk, a stack of case folders sat neatly aligned. Arya didn't reach for them. She simply stopped her gaze, locking on one Judge Raines's file, thick, heavy, and bound in deep brown leather. In the top right corner, pressed faintly into the cover, was an embossed emblem. Not Navy, not Marines. It wasn't standard for any courtroom record I'd ever seen. The design was sharp, angular, like a crest stripped of its name. Her eyes darkened. It was subtle, just a passing shadow, but I caught it. That emblem meant something to her, and not the good kind. I'd seen that kind of look before. The look of someone who's recognized an enemy without a word being spoken. The room faded for her. She was somewhere else now. Smoke. Gunfire. A night sky torn open by tracer rounds. Arya crouched beside a crumbling wall in the ruins of a fishing port overseas. The air was thick with the smell of burning fuel. She leaned over a man sprawled on the ground. His uniform scorched, his breathing ragged. His hand gripped hers with surprising strength for someone so close to the end. "Don't let this happen again," he whispered. His eyes didn't just look at her. They pinned her there, leaving her no place to hide. Moments later, they went still. Her hands stained deep red, curled into fists. "What's wrong?" The voice pulled her back. Lieutenant Porter stood in the doorway, watching her with a hint of concern. Arya didn't look at him. She smoothed the crease on her sleeve instead. "Some ghosts should stay buried," she said softly. He didn't push. He knew when to leave silence alone. From my seat, I could see her jaw shift, a tiny movement that spoke louder than words. She was tempted to use the call sign now to end this with a single sentence. But she wouldn't. She knew what would happen if she spoke too soon. The moment that call sign left her lips, the trial would be swallowed whole by the phrase national security. The courtroom would empty, the case would vanish into sealed archives, and Rains would walk out untouched. And she couldn't let him win like that. So she held. The sound of the door opening drew every head for a second. Eva Moreno stepped back into the room, her heels clicking lightly against the tile. She didn't break stride as she passed Arya, but her eyes caught hers for the briefest moment. There was a message there, a silent, "Not yet." Arya's reply was just a slow blink. She returned to her seat, hands folded neatly on the table, and let her gaze drift across the room. One by one, she counted them. The smirking officers in the back row, their crossed arms and self-satisfied grins. The clerk pretending to be lost in paperwork, Rains tapping his pen like he was keeping score. She wasn't looking at them for answers. She was looking for a gap in the crowd, the space where someone else should be. Because somewhere outside this courtroom, a name had been called. And when that name walked through these doors, the game would change entirely. By late afternoon, the light in the courtroom had shifted. The sun angled through the tall windows, cutting sharp lines across the polished wood. The air felt heavier now, like even the walls were holding their breath. Then the door opened. Admiral Jonathan Grant stepped inside, the faint glint of his 4 stars catching the dying light. He didn't rush, didn't speak, just walked with that steady, unshakable presence that made people move out of his way without realizing they had. He didn't take a seat near the front. Instead, he slipped into the last row behind everyone, his gaze fixed straight ahead. On Arya. From where I sat, I saw the corner of her mouth tighten just enough to be noticed if you were looking for it. She'd been waiting for him, and now he was here. Arya rose. "Your Honor," she said evenly. "I'd like to request a formal confirmation of my full service record before we proceed." Judge Rains leaned back, his tone dripping with impatience. "Commander Kane, your rank has already been verified. This is a waste of the court's time." "With respect, sir," Arya replied, her voice calm but carrying weight. "This confirmation is essential to the integrity of these proceedings." He stared at her for a long beat, tapping his pen against the bench. Then, with a dismissive flick of his hand, he said, "Fine. Make it quick. I doubt it will change anything." That was when Arya leaned toward the microphone, her posture still straight, her tone measured, but her words hit like a hammer. "Obsidian Dusk, November 2017 to March 2020. Task Force 88. The words hung in the air like smoke. For 3 whole seconds, nothing moved. No one spoke. It was as if the sound had been sucked out of the room. Then chaos. Phones lit up and started ringing. A captain in the gallery shot to his feet, knocking over his chair. Another officer bolted for the door, only to find it locked from the outside. The bailiff's radio crackled with frantic voices. Somewhere in the corner, a young ensign muttered, "Oh, my God," because everyone who understood those words knew exactly what they meant. Obsidian Dusk wasn't just a mission. It was a shadow, classified beyond top secret, known only to a handful of people on the planet. And Task Force 88. They didn't exist on paper. Eva, still seated near the aisle, turned her head just enough for Arya to see her. She gave the smallest nod. A signal. Now it begins. Judge Raines's face had drained of color, though he tried to hide it behind a frown. "Commander?" He started, but his voice caught in his throat. I caught the quietest exchange, Porter leaning toward Arya, his voice low. "You waited for her, didn't you?" Arya didn't answer with words. She simply let her eyes flick for the briefest moment toward the back row, where Admiral Grant sat motionless, his gaze locked on the judge. The kind of look that said this wasn't over, not even close. They moved us into the side chamber during the recess. The air in here was different, quieter, heavier, like the walls themselves knew what had just been said. Porter shut the door and rounded on Arya. "Obsidian dusk," he said slowly, almost like he was tasting the words. "That's black tier clearance. I shouldn't even know it exists." Arya didn't look at him right away. She set her cap down on the table, smoothing the brim with deliberate care, as if it helped her keep her voice steady. Task Force 88, she began, wasn't in any registry. No payroll, no official insignia. We were a ghost unit built for missions that couldn't be acknowledged, the kind that disappear even from whispers. Porter leaned forward. "And Raines?" She nodded once. "Our final op was called Silverfish. Intel said it was a small weapons cache in a remote coastal village. Routine clearance. But the information was wrong. The village wasn't empty. It was crawling with hostiles armed and waiting for us. The moment we hit shore, the sky lit up. I could almost see it in her eyes, that same distant stare she'd had earlier in the day. Half the team went down in the first 5 minutes, she said quietly. The rest of us, we were just trying to drag each other out. Radio was jammed, extraction was delayed, and every second felt like an hour. Porter's jaw tightened. How does Raines fit into this? Arya's tone sharpened. He was the legal advisor assigned to mission oversight. Every warning I flagged about unreliable intel, every risk assessment, he stamped it, cleared to proceed. We walked into a slaughter because of him. Her hands curled into fists on the table. Blackfish was silverfish all over again, she said. Different map, same mistakes, same arrogance. I wasn't going to watch another team get killed because someone at the top thought protocol mattered more than lives. From the corner, Eva finally spoke. She'd been leaning against the wall, arms folded, eyes on Arya like she was measuring the weight of each word. "You're not the only one who's been watching him," she said. "Admiral Grant has been tracking this pattern for years. He just needed proof, and the right moment to act. That's why he was here today," Porter muttered. Eva's gaze didn't waver. "No, that's why he hasn't been here until now. The call sign isn't just a key, it's the trigger. Now the right doors are going to open and the wrong ones are going to slam shut." Arya met her eyes, and for the first time all day, I saw something shift in her expression. Not relief exactly, but the faint glimmer of someone who knew the tide had just turned. The clock on the wall ticked louder than it should have. Outside, I could hear muffled voices, hurried footsteps, the sound of a chain sliding across the main doors. Whatever storm was brewing out there, it had already been set in motion. And in that small, dimly lit room, the truth of Task Force 88 and the blood-stained shadow of Silverfish finally had a name to pin it to. When the court reconvened, the atmosphere felt different. The sunlight had shifted, throwing long shadows across the room, and every single eye seemed to be drawn to the man now seated in the front row. Admiral Grant, in full dress whites, sat perfectly still, hands folded, his gaze locked on Judge Raines. It wasn't the look of a man observing proceedings. It was the look of a man measuring a target. Raines noticed. His grip on the gavel tightened, the tendons in his hand flexing. But he forced a smirk, the kind meant to say, "I'm still in control." Colonel Harlow rose with a little too much swagger. "Your Honor," he began, voice slick in light of the Theatrics earlier, I believe this will restore clarity. He handed a thick folder to the clerk. Within seconds, the projector lit up with grainy black and white images, alleged mission footage. A clipped audio file played Arya's voice cold and defiant. Negative, I will not proceed. Harlow turned toward the gallery as if to let the words sink in. Not an isolated lapse in judgment. This is a pattern. This is who she is. His tone dripped with disdain, and when he emphasized she, a couple of officers in the back exchanged knowing smirks. Arya's jaw tightened, but she didn't move. Not yet. From her seat behind the defense table, Eva shifted, sliding a tiny flash drive into Porter's hand without so much as a glance. Porter's brow furrowed as he scanned the contents. Then slowly, a spark of satisfaction crossed his face. He stood. Permission to address the court. Rains leaned back. Proceed, he said, voice edged with boredom. This evidence, Porter began tapping the screen, is a lie. A ripple ran through the gallery. The timestamps are falsified, the mission codes non-existent, and the voice sample spliced together from two separate comms channels 18 months apart. Rains raised his gavel, but Grant's voice cut through the room like a blade. Let him finish. It wasn't a suggestion. The judge froze for a beat before lowering the gavel back to the desk. Porter continued. The screen changed again this time, showing the unedited feed. Same moment, same voice. But now the rest of the transmission played negative. I will not proceed until the medevac clears the LZ. We have 2 Marines on stretchers. I'm not leaving them behind. Gasps broke the silence. The footage showed Arya kneeling beside a bloodied Marine, her hands pressed to his wound as the helicopter blades kicked up dust around them. From the far side of the room, a tall Navy officer stood. Your Honor, he said firmly, I was the communications officer for that mission. This is the original file straight from the secure archive. Harlow's confidence faltered. Objection. Overruled. Rains snapped, but his voice lacked the bite it had earlier. Grant leaned forward in his seat, his eyes locked on the judge. Your Honor, I suggest we all listen very carefully from here on. For a long, tense moment, Rains didn't reply. His knuckles whitened on the gavel, and in that silence, everyone in the room understood the balance of power had shifted, and it wasn't in his favor. The tension was so thick you could almost taste it. Judge Victor Rains leaned forward, voice dripping with venom. Commander Kane, before we celebrate your little stunt, let's address the matter you've been avoiding, your unauthorized disclosure of classified intelligence. He paused, letting the words hang like a blade over her head. Do you deny sharing operational data with civilians? Gasps scattered across the room. Harlow smirked like a man who'd just set the trap. Arya didn't blink. She simply laced her fingers together and stared back at Rains, calm, unshaken. Grant, seated in the front row, now broke the silence. Show it. The clerk hesitated, glancing at the judge. Rains barked. That's not admissible. Grant's voice cut through him, low but lethal. Now. The screen flickered on, revealing scanned pages, official approval forms, stamped with black tier clearance markings. At the bottom of each, in bold, undeniable ink, Victor Rains. Porter rose from his chair, pacing deliberately toward the center. These are sign-off authorizations for Operation Silverfish. Intelligence flagged as unreliable twice by your own analysts. He jabbed at the highlighted section. Yet you, Judge Rains, then legal advisor Rains, overrode both warnings. You didn't just greenlight the mission, you pushed it forward. The murmur in the gallery turned into a low rumble. A Navy commander stood abruptly. My brother was on Silverfish. He didn't make it home. You knew the intel was bad. That's not relevant to these proceedings, Rains snapped, but his voice cracked under the weight of the moment. It's relevant when lives were thrown away. Another voice shot back, a Marine captain, his jaw tight with fury. This wasn't a mistake. This was negligence. One by one, uniformed officers rose from their seats. Their eyes were hard, their voices sharper. "You killed our people. You buried it to save yourself." Rains gripped the bench knuckles, white sweat breaking at his temples. He raised the gavel, but his hand trembled. "Sit down, or you've lost that authority," Grant said, standing now, his presence filling the room. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. Every syllable hit like a hammer. He turned to the clerk. "Read my order into the record." The clerk's voice was steady. "Effective immediately, the charges against Commander Arya Kane are dismissed. Her record is amended to reflect exemplary service. Full honors restored." The rumble in the gallery shifted from outrage to quiet, simmering satisfaction. Grant's gaze locked on Rains. "You will vacate the bench at once. Pending a formal tribunal, you are relieved of duty." Two military police stepped forward. The sound of their boots on the hardwood echoed louder than any gavel strike. As they approached, Rains's last fragments of defiance slipped into desperation. "This isn't over. It is..." Arya's voice cut in low and controlled the kind of tone that makes people lean closer. She stood, straightened her uniform, and looked directly at him. "You thought restraint was weakness. You were wrong. The MPs took him by the arms." The gallery parted eyes following every step of his slow, humiliating walk to the doors. Just before he crossed the threshold, Arya added almost like an afterthought, but every ear in the room caught it. "Silverfish will haunt you longer than it ever haunted me." The doors slammed shut. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was heavy. Everyone knew something had shifted, not just in the room, but in the balance of power itself. The courtroom had emptied, but the air hadn't. It lingered thick with the smell of paper sweat and something else that didn't belong in a place built for justice. The echo of the gavel still sat in the bones of the room. Arya stayed in her seat, back straight, hands folded. Victory wasn't loud. It was a quiet, measured thing. You sat with it until you decided what to do next. From the front row, Admiral Grant didn't blink. She stepped into the well of the court like she owned it, and maybe she did. Commander Kane Grant began, her voice low, but carrying, "You have 3 paths ahead of you." Arya said nothing, only watched. Option 1, walk away clean. Honorable discharge, full benefits. You disappear from the system, live your life. Option 2, return to rank, back into the chain of command, same as before. Option 3. She paused, letting the silence tighten. Special assignment under my direct authority. No intermediaries, no oversight committees. If it goes wrong, it's on me and on you. It wasn't a recruitment pitch. It was a contract with blood already inked. Arya leaned back slightly. Freedom, or the fight. Grant went on. This assignment isn't conventional. Surgical extractions, verifying intel before it costs lives. Breaking operations that ignore civilian risk. Rules of engagement tailored to conscience, not convenience. Her eyes locked with Arya's. "I know you're tired, but I also know why you didn't walk away today." Arya's fingers tapped once against her knee before she spoke. "I'll take option 3 if I choose my own team. No substitutions for politics. Direct line to you. And I want written guarantees families from Silverfish receive back pay healthcare education for their children. Not promises. Documents. Signed. Not stamped." Grant's jaw tightened, not in resistance but in respect. Approved. Funding line carved in writing. No silent edits. She wasn't bargaining for leverage, Porter murmured from behind them. She's bargaining for ghosts. Grant didn't flinch. The Navy needs people like you, not just soldiers but leaders who can carry the weight and still see straight. Porter stepped closer, resting one hand lightly on the bench. "You know what you're walking into, right? The people you'll be chasing. They survive by erasing their own paper trails. They won't hit you head on. They'll come for you sideways." Arya almost smiled. Then I'll watch the corners. Porter smirked faintly. If you need a counsel of record who doesn't rattle, you have my number. She met his eyes. Don't block unknown numbers. From the aisle, Eva Moreno approached her steps, measured gaze fixed. She slipped a small matte black card into Aria's hand. One-time encryption key. Use it once, then burn it. What's on the other end? Aria asked. Eva's voice was barely above a whisper. Not all signatures on Silverfish belong to Rains. Some of them don't like sunlight. Aria closed her fingers over the card. Not paranoia. A map. Grant broke the silence. This isn't a promotion, Commander. This is a promise, one you can't unmake. Aria stood, her shadow stretching across the worn wood floor. Restraint kept me alive. It won't keep me quiet. Grant gave a single decisive nod. Then it's done. The tension in the room shifted lighter for some, heavier for others. As they filed out, Aria glanced back at the judge's bench. It was empty now, but the weight of what had happened here would outlast every face in the room. She wasn't free, not yet. But for the first time in years, she wasn't trapped either. The sky over Arlington was a pale, washed-out gray, the kind that made the rows of white headstones seem even sharper against the grass. Aria moved slowly between them, her dress blues pressed crisp, her cap tucked under one arm. In her right hand she carried a small, smooth river stone. Not flowers, not flags. A stone, the tradition of her old unit. You placed it and it stayed, proof you'd been there, proof you remembered. She stopped at the 7th headstone in the row. The name was etched deep, the letters worn just enough to show time had passed, but not enough to soften the weight they carried. She crouched, resting the stone at its base, her fingertips lingering against the cold marble. Her voice was quiet, almost swallowed by the wind. I kept my promise, Ramirez. Blackfish didn't happen twice, and it never will. For a long moment she stayed there, letting silence say what words couldn't. A shadow stretched over the grave. She didn't look up. She already knew who it was. Commander Grant's voice was softer than it had been in the courtroom stripped of the steel. Aria rose slowly. Admiral. Grant held out a sealed folder, the kind without a return label, the kind that only traveled from hand to hand. Your team roster, clearances, assignments, extraction codes. Every name in there, you chose them. Aria took it, tucking it under her arm without opening it. You expect me to start right away? Grant shook her head. No, I expect you to know that what you build from here carries weight. Echoes, Commander. Some of them you'll never outrun. Aria's gaze drifted back to the headstone. Then we stand watch for them. She looked at Grant. Echo Vigil. That's the name. Grant gave a short nod. Then Echo Vigil it is. They stood in silence for a beat. Two officers in a cemetery where rank meant nothing. From the far end of the row, movement caught Aria's eye. A lone man placing a stone on a different headstone. His posture was military precise. He straightened, brushed his fingers over the name, and then looked up. Their eyes met. Just for a second. There was something there, a flicker of recognition she couldn't quite place. But before she could take a step, he turned away, walking between the rows until he disappeared into the haze. Grant noticed her, still staring. Friend of yours? I'm not sure, Aria said quietly. But I've seen that look before, in people who carry more than they can tell. The wind picked up, rattling the leaves in the distance. Grant broke the moment. Finish here. Then get ready. Echo Vigil won't stay in the shadows for long. Aria placed one last hand on the headstone, the stone at its base catching a glint of the fading light. We'll keep watch, she whispered. Then she turned, walking with the folder under her arm, the name Echo Vigil already heavy on her shoulders, but not heavier than she could bear. The late afternoon sun spilled across the narrow barracks room, painting everything in amber. Arya stood in the middle of it, a half-packed duffel at her feet, hands resting on the edge of her desk. She didn't move for a long moment. The room was quiet except for the distant hum of a ventilation unit. Her eyes drifted to the wall above her bed. There, framed in black wood, hung the photo her old unit. Faces in uniform, some smiling, some solemn, all standing in the tight formation that had once been their shield against the world. She stepped closer, tracing each familiar face with her gaze. A few of them were gone now. Too many. She reached out and let her fingers rest against the glass. The cool surface bit against her skin, grounding her. For a heartbeat, it felt like they were still there, waiting for orders, waiting for her. Behind her, the door opened with a soft creak. Porter leaned casually on the frame, arms crossed. His voice was quiet, almost careful. "They'll remember you for this, you know." Arya didn't turn right away. She studied the photo for another beat, as if measuring her answer. Then, with a slow inhale, she said, "I didn't do it for them." Finally, she looked at him, her eyes steady, voice firm but warm. "I did it for us." A silence followed. Not the awkward kind, but the heavy, knowing kind. Porter gave a small nod, his usual smirk replaced by something more subdued. He stepped inside, resting one hand on the desk. "You've got the new orders?" he asked. "They're in the bag," she replied, nudging the duffel with her foot. "Grant gave me her word. My team, my terms. We start in 2 weeks." Porter's mouth quirked into the faintest smile. "Echo Vigil." At the sound of the name, Arya's eyes softened. "Yeah, Echo Vigil." She didn't explain it. She didn't need to. He already knew what it meant. Standing guard for the ones who couldn't anymore. Her gaze drifted back to the window. Outside, the base was still alive with movement sailors heading to evening duty, the metallic clang of distant tools, the muted rumble of a truck passing by. Life didn't pause for victories, not in this world. Porter followed her gaze, then glanced back at her. "You sure you're ready for this different kind of battlefield?" Arya gave a faint, wry smile. "Battlefields change. The fight doesn't." She zipped her duffel shut, the sound loud in the quiet room. With one last look at the photo, she took it down from the wall, sliding it carefully into the side pocket of her bag. The frame was solid in her hand, heavier than it looked, maybe because it carried more than wood and glass. As she slung the duffel over her shoulder, Porter opened the door wider. A gust of cool evening air drifted in, carrying with it the faint scent of salt from the harbor. They stepped outside together. The sun was sinking low now, its last light cutting long shadows across the concrete. Somewhere a flag rope clinked softly against a metal pole. Arya paused at the top of the steps, letting the breeze wrap around her. Porter stopped beside her. What now? Arya's eyes followed the horizon. "Now we work. We train. We stay ready." She adjusted the strap on her shoulder, her voice low but unwavering. "Because the next time someone tries to bury the truth, we'll be there first." For a long moment, they just stood there. The base around them moved on orders, shouted boots, striking pavement, the steady rhythm of duty. But for Arya, everything felt suspended, balanced on the edge of what came next. Porter broke the quiet with a half smile. "Guess this is where I say good luck." She glanced at him, a flicker of amusement in her eyes. "You can try. I've never been much for luck." They exchanged a look, part farewell, part promise, and then Porter stepped back, letting her go. Arya started down the steps, the late-day light catching the brass on her uniform. Each step felt deliberate, measured, like she was already walking into the next chapter. She didn't look back. At the bottom, she paused once more, tilting her head toward the wind. It carried no voices, no echoes, just the quiet certainty of a path chosen. Her face was calm now. Calm, but not empty. The world would remember what happened in that courtroom. Some would praise her, others would twist it, and a few would try to bury it. But none of that mattered. She had chosen her fight, and she knew exactly where she would stand. The narrator's voice settled in low and sure, as if confiding in the listener. Some battles are fought in the open, others in the shadows. She's ready for both. And with that, the scene faded to black, and that's where Arya's chapter closes. At least for now. Her story reminds us that courage isn't just about standing tall in the heat of battle, it's about choosing integrity when no one's watching and protecting the truth, even when it comes at a cost. If this story moved you, I'd love for you to hit that like button, share it with a friend who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Mr. Max Stories so you won't miss the next powerful tale we bring to life. Your support isn't just a number. It's the fuel that keeps the Mr. Max Stories team going, helping us create more stories that inspire, challenge, and stay with you long after they end. And remember, here at Mr. Max Stories, we don't just tell stories, we stand guard over them.